Welcome to biology class, children. Today we are going to learn a new lesson number 15, nervous system. You know that human body has several systems like digestive system, circulatory system, respiratory system, nervous system, etc. So nervous system is one among them. In this lesson, we are going to learn about the components of nervous system. We will analyze the transmission of nerve impulse. We will understand the division of human nervous system, the different sections of brain which handle different functions, and also we will learn the significance of reflex action and its operative pathway. The characteristic feature of all living organism is responding to stimuli. What is stimuli? So stimuli is an evoke or an impulse or the change in the environmental condition that will be sensed by our body, detected by the receptors. So receptors are present on the surface of our body. They include our skin and the sense organs. So the stimulus refers to the changes that happens in the environmental condition that are detected by the receptors present in the body. So we also react to certain things, like when somebody scolds, we react differently. When somebody praises, we react differently. So all these are the responses we give for the stimulus. So relevant changes in the activities of an organism to a particular stimuli are called their reactions or responses. Living organisms show their response to different kinds of stimuli like light, heat, cold, sound, smell, taste, touch, pleasure, pain, or the force of gravity, etc. So this taste, we react in different way. When we get the smell of different food items, we react differently. So automatically when we get a smell of a pleasant food which we like, our salivary gland salivates. So all these are the stimuli and we will react to them in a different way. Some more examples like withdrawal of our hands when we touch the hot objects, or closing of our eyes when bright light flash on our eyes. So in these conditions, heat and light is the stimulus to which the body shows its response. So it is on receiving a stimulus, the body responds in a manner that is most appropriate for its survival and functioning. To provide the correct response to a stimulus, it is necessary that all our organs work together in a proper coordinated manner. So for this, you just refer to this diagram. So we have our nervous system, central nervous system, to which all our receptor organs receives the receptors like sight, taste, sound, as well as smell and touching, and also we feel the changes in the environment through our skin. All these are received by our receptor organs and they are taken to our brain as messages, to which our body reacts in a proper way. So there is coordination of all these organs to give a correct response for the correct stimulus. So this working together of various organs in a systematic, controlled and efficient way to produce the proper response to various stimuli is called coordination. In animals, including human beings, the coordination between the various cells and organs is essential for their diverse activity and to maintain the physiological balance. The physiological balance is otherwise called as homeostasis or stability. Now we shall learn about the nervous system. The nervous system is made up of nervous tissue. It is formed of three distinct components, namely the neurons, neuroglia and nerve fibers. The first one is called as neuron or the nerve cell. A neuron or the nerve cell is the structural and functional unit of the nervous system, and it is the longest cell of our body with a length of about 100 millimeter. So these cells are highly specialized to detect and receive and transmit the different kinds of stimuli. The information is conducted through the neurons in the form of electrical impulse from one part of the body to another. So next type of cell component of the nervous system is neuroglia. So glia means accessory or supporting. So neuroglia are otherwise called as supporting cells of the nervous system. They are non-exciting. They will not get excited by the stimulus or the electrical impulse. They are just supporting the nervous tissue that get electrical impulse, that get excited. They do not initiate or conduct nerve impulse. Third one is nerve fiber. The nerve fibers are the long slender processes of neurons, and a number of nerve fibers are bundled together to form the nerves. So this is the diagram of the nerve. Here we can see the neuroglial cells like microglia, astrocyte and oligodendrocyte. So ependymal cells along with the neurons. Now let us see the structure of neuron. A neuron typically consists of three basic structures. They are cyton, dendrites and axon. So first one is cyton. Cyton is otherwise called as the body, cell body or perikaryon. So karyon means nucleus. Nucleus is present in the cell body or cyton. So it has a central nucleus with abundant cytoplasm, and the cytoplasm is termed as neuroplasm because they are present in the nerve cell. The cytoplasm has got large granular bodies which are called as Nissl granules, and other organelles like mitochondria, ribosomes, endoplasmic reticulum, lysosomes, etc. Neurons do not have the ability to divide. They will not produce new neurons by division. Several neurofibrils are present in the cytoplasm, and that helps in the transmission of the nerve impulses to and from the cell body. Next we have dendrites. So what are dendrites? They are nothing but the numerous branched cytoplasmic processes that projects from the surface of the cell body or cyton. They will conduct the impulse towards the cyton, and the branched projections increases the surface area for receiving the signals from the other cell. Next structure is axon. Axon is a single elongated slender projection of cyton. The end of the axon terminates as fine branches which will terminate with knob-like structures called synaptic knobs. The plasma membrane of the axon is called as axolemma, while the cytoplasm in the axon is called as axoplasm. It carries the impulse away from the cyton. The axon may be covered by myelin sheath, and it is further covered by layer of Schwann cells called neurilemma. The myelin sheath will break at intervals by depressions called nodes of Ranvier. See, here is the depression where the myelin sheath will break, and these depressions are called as nodes of Ranvier, and the region between the two consecutive nodes is called as internode. The myelin sheath will act as an insulator and ensures rapid transmission of nerve impulse. Next we have synapse. Synapse is a junction between the synaptic knob of axon of one neuron with the dendron of the next neuron. So it lies between two neurons, axon of the first neuron and the dendron of the next neuron will join with the synaptic knob. The information from one neuron can pass to the another neuron through these junctions only. When they pass, they release a chemical substance called as neurotransmitter. So this forms the synaptic knob. So let us see the types of neuron. The neurons may be of different types based on their structure and function. So structurally the neurons may be classified like this. First one is unipolar neuron, where only one nerve processes arise from the cyton, which acts as both axon as well as the dendron. So there is no dendron, one process that will act as axon and dendron. The second one is bipolar neurons, in which it will have one axon and one dendron. So here is the dendron and here is the axon. So next one is multipolar neuron, where the cyton gives rise to many dendrons and an axon. Here this is the pseudo unipolar, where we have one projections out of the cyton that will divide into two projections. So it is called pseudo unipolar. Now let's see where are they found. So unipolar neurons are found in the early embryos but not in the adult, whereas the bipolar neurons found on the retina of the eye and olfactory epithelium of our nasal chambers. Multipolar neurons are found in the cerebral cortex of our brain. On the basis of the functions, neurons are categorized as sensory or afferent neuron that carry the impulses from the sense organs to the central nervous system, whereas the motor or the efferent neuron will carry the impulse from the brain to the effector organ, such as muscle fiber or a gland. The third one is the associated neuron that conducts the impulse between this is the associated neuron, that this will conduct the impulse between the sensory as well as the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. Now let's see the types of nerve fiber. Nerve fibers are of two types based on the presence and absence of the myelin sheath. So myelin nerve fiber, myelinated nerve fiber, the axon when it is covered with the myelin sheath like this. Non-myelinated nerve fiber when axon is not covered by myelin sheath. So the myelinated neurons will form the white matter of the brain and non-myelinated neuron will form the grey matter of the brain. Next we shall learn the transmission of nerve impulse. All the information from the environment are detected by the receptor organs, and they are located on the surface of our body like eyes, ears, nose and skin, etc. The information from these receptors are transmitted as electrical impulse and received by the dendritic tip of the neuron. So here is the dendritic tip of the neuron. So this impulse then travels from the dendrites to the cell body, then along the axon and reaches the terminal end. On reaching the axonal end, it causes the nerve endings to release a chemical substance which is called as neurotransmitter. So this will diffuse across the synapse and start a similar electrical impulse in the dendrites of the next neuron, then to their cell body and to be carried along the axon. So in this way the electrical impulse reaches the brain or the spinal cord by passing the electrical impulse from one neuron to the another neuron, from dendritic end to the cyton to the axon. The response from the brain or the spinal cord is similarly passed on to the effector organ such as the muscle or a gland cell, and that will do the desired response. The flow of the nerve impulse from axonal end of one neuron to the dendrite of the another neuron through the synapse is called as synaptic transmission. For this synaptic transmission, neurotransmitters will help, and these neurotransmitters are the chemicals which allow the transmission of the nerve impulse from the axon and terminal of one neuron to the dendron of another neuron or to an effector organ. The important neurotransmitter released by the neuron is called as acetylcholine, which is very important. Now, the human nervous system can be differentiated into three. They are central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and autonomic nervous system. So, CNS acts as a center for the information processing and control, and it consists of brain and the spinal cord. PNS is made up of the nerves which connects the brain and the spinal cord to the other parts of the body. And ANS formed by the sympathetic as well as parasympathetic nerves. So, ANS or the autonomic nervous system consists of parasympathetic nerves and sympathetic nerves, and they are found on the spinal cord. These are the spots, the green color spots are the spots for the parasympathetic nerve division, and the red color dots are the spots for the sympathetic nerves that arise from the spinal cord, and they will parasympathetic division, they will constrict, when they constrict the pupil, this sympathetic will dilate the pupil, they will work in the opposite way. It stimulates the saliva production, and this will inhibit or stops the saliva production. Like that it goes on. The central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord is being delicate, and they are very vital structures. They are protected in the bony cavities of the skull and the vertebral column respectively. Brain is protected or kept in the brain box or the skull, and the spinal cord is kept inside the vertebral column. CNS is formed of two types of matter, such as white matter and grey matter, with respect to the presence and the absence of the myelin sheaths, as we have seen before. Meninges of the brain. So what are meninges? Meninges are the covering membranes. The brain is controlling center of all the body activities, and it is connected by the three connective tissue membranes or meninges. The outermost is called as the dura mater. Dura means tough, and it is outermost thick fibrous membrane. Inside that we have the arachnoid matter, which forms a middle layer. This is thin vascular membrane, providing a web-like cushion for the brain. Whereas the innermost is called as a pia mater, and it is very thin and delicate membrane, richly supplied with the blood vessels. So meningeal membranes protects the brain from the mechanical injury. So here you can see the dura mater, which is thick. This is the arachnoid matter, and the pia mater, which is thin and very close to the brain. A human brain is formed of three main parts, namely the forebrain, midbrain, and the hindbrain. So forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. This is the structure. The forebrain is formed of the cerebrum and the diencephalon. The cerebrum is outside, and the diencephalon is inside the cerebrum. So diencephalon consists of the dorsal thalamus and the ventral hypothalamus. Now let us see what is cerebrum. So cerebrum is the largest part, forming nearly 2/3 of the brain, which is kept in the skull. So cerebrum is longitudinally divided into two halves as right and the left hemisphere, cerebral hemisphere, by a deep median cleft. The two cerebral hemispheres are interconnected by a thick band of nerve fibers, which is called as corpus callosum, which is very important question. Two cerebral hemispheres are interconnected by thick band of nerve fiber called as corpus callosum. The outer portion of each cerebral hemisphere is formed of the grey matter, and it is called as the cerebral cortex, whereas the inner deeper part is formed of white matter, and it is called as the medulla, cerebral medulla. The cortex is extremely folded, forming elevations called as gyri, with depressions in between them. They are termed as the sulci. This will increase the surface area of the brain. So each hemisphere is divisible into frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and occipital lobe. So red color is the frontal lobe, parietal is the blue color lobe, temporal yellow color, as well as occipital, here it is given as green color. So each cerebral hemisphere is divisible into 4 lobes: frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. So So these lobes are also known as cerebral lobes, and they are associated with specific function. So any damage in specific lobe in turn will affect that function. The cerebrum is responsible for thinking, intelligence, consciousness, memory, imagination, reasoning and willpower. Next comes the thalamus. So thalamus is present in the cerebral medulla, diencephalon. Thalamus is present in the cerebral medulla, which forms a major conducting center for sensory as well as motor signaling. It acts as the relay center. Relay means passing the impulse from one region to the next region. Next comes the hypothalamus. So it is lying at the base of the thalamus and it controls the voluntary action like hunger, thirst, sleep, sweating, sexual desire, anger, fear, water balance, blood pressure, etc. And this also acts as a thermoregulator and the body temperature is maintained by this. It controls the secretion of the hormones from the anterior pituitary, and it is an important link between the nervous system and the endocrine system. So pituitary gland becomes the link between the nervous system and the endocrine system, which will be controlled by the hypothalamus. Next comes the midbrain. Midbrain is located between the thalamus of the forebrain and the hindbrain. The dorsal portion of the midbrain consists of four rounded bodies called corpora quadrigemina. So they will connect the nerves to the ear and the eyes, and they control visual and auditory reflexes. Next is hindbrain. So hindbrain is formed of three parts, namely cerebellum, pons and medulla oblongata. So cerebellum is the second largest part of the brain, which is formed of two large sized hemisphere and middle vermis. It coordinates the voluntary movements and also maintains the body balance. So voluntary movements are the movements that we do with our will, and maintaining the body balance for standing erect, sitting and maintaining the posture of our body in all position. Next is the pons. Pons in Latin means bridge. So it becomes a bridge between the lobes of the cerebellum, forming nerve fibers. So it relays the signal between the cerebellum and the spinal cord with the midbrain and cerebrum. It controls respiration and sleep cycle. Next comes the medulla oblongata, which is the posterior most part of the brain that connects the brain to the spinal cord. It has the cardiac center, respiratory center, vasomotor centers to control the heartbeat and respiration and contraction of the blood vessels respectively. It regulates vomiting as well as salivation. Now let us summarize the functions of different structures of the brain. First one is cerebral cortex. Cerebral cortex is involved with sensory perception, control of voluntary function, language, thinking, memory, decision making and creativity. Next is thalamus. Thalamus is involved in, it acts as relay station. It helps to convey the information from one region to another region. Hypothalamus. Hypothalamus helps to control the temperature, thirst, hunger, urination, and it becomes an important link between the nervous system and endocrine glands by acting upon the anterior pituitary gland to secrete or to stop the secretion of its hormone. Next is cerebellum. Cerebellum helps to maintain the posture and balance, coordinate the voluntary muscle activity. Pons and medulla play a role in sleep-wake cycle, cardiovascular, respiratory and digestive control centers. Spinal cord. Spinal cord is a cylindrical structure lying in the neural canal of the vertebral column at our back. It is also covered by meninges like brain. It extends from the lower end of the medulla oblongata to the first lumbar vertebrae. The posterior most region of the spinal cord tapers into thin fibrous thread-like structure called filum terminale, and internally spinal cord contains a cerebrospinal fluid filled cavity. It is known as central canal. So here you can see the cross section of the spinal cord. The grey matter of the spinal cord is H shape. Can you see the H shape? And here present the grey matter. The upper end of the H letter forms the posterior horns and the lower forms the anterior horns. A bundle of fiber passes into the posterior horns, forming the dorsal afferent root. So this is the dorsal afferent root, and fiber passes outward from the efferent root ventrally, and these roots joins to form the spinal nerves. The white matter is external and have the bundle of nerve tract. The spinal cord conducts the sensory and motor impulses to and from the brain. It controls the reflex action of the body. Now let's learn about the cerebrospinal fluid. The brain is suspended in the special fluid environment, and this is called as cerebrospinal fluid. In short, we say CSF. It is a lymph-like watery fluid that surrounds and protects the brain within the skull. So it also fills the central canal of the spinal cord. So cerebrospinal fluid gives a cushion-like mechanism at the time of any shock or injury to the brain. Function. It acts as a shock absorbing fluid and protects the brain from any damage when it is subjected to any sudden jerk. It supplies the nutrients to the brain. It collects and removes the waste from the brain. It is also responsible for maintaining constant pressure inside the cranium. So pressure is maintained with the help of addition and deletion of the cerebrospinal fluid inside the cavity. Next is the reflex action. So what is reflex action? A reflex action is any response that occurs automatically without our consciousness. So this can be classified as into two. One is simple basic reflexes. So these reflexes are inbuilt, and when we are born itself they are present within us, and they are unlearned responses. So many of these actions we perform every day, like winking of our eyes when any dust particles enters, sneezing, coughing, yawning, etc. So we perform these actions without even thinking. Whereas the second one is the acquired or the conditioned reflexes. So these reflexes are the results of any practice or learning. So playing a harmonium by striking a particular key on seeing a musical note is an example of conditioned reflex. So most of the reflexes are monitored and controlled by the spinal cord only, and so all the reflexes are called as spinal reflexes. So pathway can be taken by the nerve impulse to accomplish the reflex action, and this pathway is otherwise called as a reflex arc. It consists of series of nerve fiber. How the body executes reflex action when we touch a hot plate. When we touch a hot plate, the stimulus is the heat, and this is sensed by the receptors of our hand, the thermoreceptors of our hand. And this stimulus triggers an impulse in the sensory neuron, and this is taken through the sensory neuron to the spinal cord. In the spinal cord, when it reaches the gray region of the spinal cord, the impulse is conveyed to the associated neuron, and in the spinal cord itself will interpret the stimulus, and the impulse is passed to the relay neuron, which in turn to the motor neuron of our hand. The motor neuron carry the command from the spinal cord to our arm, and the muscle in our arm will contract, and we will be able to withdraw our hand immediately from the pan. and so there is no participation of the brain. The interpretation of the stimulus is done by the spinal cord itself, and this becomes a very good example for reflex action. Next we shall learn the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system is formed by the nerves which are arising from the brain and the spinal cord. The nerves that arise from the brain is called as cranial nerves, and the nerves that are arising from the spinal cord are called as spinal nerves. There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves in human body. Some of the cranial nerves are sensory, and they are example for that is optic nerve. This will innervate our eyes. And some are motor nerves. Example for that is oculomotor nerve, that will help in the rotation of the eyeball. This also innervates the eye muscles and muscles of the iris and the tear gland. Next comes the spinal nerves. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Each spinal nerve has a dorsal sensory root and a ventral motor root. And the direction of the impulse in the dorsal root is towards the spinal cord, and the ventral root is away from the spinal cord, which we have seen in the reflex action. This diagram shows the 12 pairs of cranial nerve and 31 pairs of spinal nerves. The names of the cranial nerves: olfactory nerve, optic nerve, oculomotor nerve, trochlear nerve, trigeminal, abducens, facial nerve, vestibulocochlear nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve, vagus nerve, accessory nerve, and hypoglossal nerve. The spinal nerves are named in such a way that the cervical region will have 1 to 8, C1 to C8, thoracic region will have 12 pairs, T1 to T12, lumbar region will have 5 pairs, L1 to L5, sacral region will have 5 pairs, S1 to S5, and last pair is coccygeal. So we have autonomic nervous system. So autonomic nervous system consists of two components like parasympathetic nervous system and sympathetic nervous system. And this parasympathetic nervous system work antagonistically or oppositely to the parasympathetic nervous system. For example, a nerve which stimulates the secretion of saliva belongs to the parasympathetic nervous system. So this will be opposed by a nerve which is belonging to the sympathetic nervous system, and this nerve will inhibit the salivation or stop the salivation. Similarly, parasympathetic nerve, when it helps in the constriction of the pupil, whereas the sympathetic nerve will help to dilate the pupil. So like that, so pair of nerves from the sympathetic as well as the parasympathetic will work antagonistically to control the activities of our visceral organs. And so this autonomic nervous system is otherwise called as visceral nervous system, as it regulates the functions of the visceral organs, internal visceral organs of our body, and they always work opposite way or antagonistic. They enable the body to perform rapid and specific visceral activities in order to maintain the steady state or the homeostasis. It also controls the involuntary actions of the visceral organs.